Hi, Jason. Thank you so much for joining me today for this Swimmer Open University webinar that is being recorded. If you could please introduce yourself, I would appreciate it.
Sure. My name is Jason Misium. I work for a company called Daredrop, and I lead the business development and sales team there. Daredrop works specifically in influencer marketing, and we work primarily, or at least right now, we work primarily with game developers and publishers who generally use influencer marketing as kind of their primary channel to let the world know they're releasing new titles.
Awesome. Well, with that experience that you have in influencer marketing, can you please tell us what is the power of influencer marketing? What's the difference?
Great question. There are a couple of things that I think have drawn everybody, but I think especially game publishers to influencer marketing, now often called creator marketing. I think the first one is everybody knows that the best kind of marketing is free. Everybody wants people to just be excited about their product and talk about it. And so, creator marketing, even when it's paid, comes much closer to that experience than, for example, an ad. And one of the ways you can see that is that when you do, creator marketing, you will see a lot of other people will become involved in the campaign organically. Other people will talk about the product. Other people will retweet the thing that you tweeted out. Whereas with an ad, very few people are capturing an ad and then sharing it, on their socials because they're excited about the product. So that's, one of the big signs that creator marketing kind of permeates through kind of the way people think about products or they think about a certain space very differently from traditional advertising. I think the other one is increasingly ads are driven by a very small number of channels. And so for a lot of, if you're a very big player, and certainly you see this in gaming, if you are somebody who makes a huge video game that everybody knows about, you can afford ads and you can buy ads and you can buy everyone's attention for a month or two. If you're a smaller game developer, that's borderline impossible. It's very hard for you to, for example, create Facebook ads for the very specific niche of game that you're looking for. So it's, in general, they see it as much more rewarding to be able to target their particular niche of game players and hopefully capture that very specific audience. So that's something that increasingly kind of smaller publishers and developers find themselves doing just because ads have become dominated by very big players.
Awesome. No, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that. Can you give us a good example of how an influencer made a difference for any of your clients or brands or publishers?
Oh, sure. Gosh, there's quite a few games that have become, we've worked on some games that have done very well predominantly through influencers. I would say that most recently, a game that was a big retro hit was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had like a new retro video game come out. And that was largely driven by kind of word of mouth and influencers and people who, remember the series and love the whole Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles brand. I think probably the biggest example that I can think of off the top of my head from several years ago was a game called Among Us, which is now one of the most played, kind of online games. And it was very much driven by it became big, even I think 2.5 years after it came out. It was one of these, the game had been released, it was an interesting game, and then some people discovered it and started playing it online, and it became this huge viral sensation. And that's happening more and more. I mean, that's just one example, but there are a lot of titles now that are trying to, even big titles now, will try to recreate that kind of organic viral discovery feeling by targeting primarily creators and influencers rather than ad space.
Okay. If I'm a company, I'm a publisher, I'm a game developer, for example, how do I engage an influencer? How does that work?
A great question. And it's a huge challenge right now because for one, there are so many different influencer platforms. And they all have their own different use case, I would say, that they fit. I think traditionally people thought of, Facebook or Twitter or, Instagram. Increasingly, it's becoming platforms like Twitch and TikTok. Um, and they're all very different. What you can share on them, the kind of content you can share, what kind of content looks good on them, and the people who are big on them are all very different. For example, on Twitch, there aren't very many celebrities who didn't exist outside of Twitch, whereas that's not the case on Instagram. You can be famous in real life and have a huge Instagram account, and so there are a lot of big differences there. I think if you're a company right now, you kind of have two methods. One is you go and look for a marketing or a PR agency that has a relationship with some creators or some influencers and kind of knows how that works. And as part of their package, they will offer, hey, like, let's work with such and such creators. The other option is you can work with a talent agency who represents the creators themselves. Usually they represent a group of them, and you can reach out to them, and a lot of high-end influencers are exclusive to a particular talent agency, and you have to work through them and their agent. Increasingly, there are platforms like ours where you can work with kind of a larger array of creators. We work with the top creators, but we also work with a lot of kind of new and up and coming creators. And we work at a much bigger scale rather than having maybe 10 or 50 creators. We've worked with thousands, tens of thousands. So more and more companies are attracted to us because of something like that. But it's still difficult. I mean, there are so many creators on Twitch and TikTok and Instagram who make really good content that discovery can actually be extremely difficult for a company, especially if you're not familiar with the platform yourself or if it's your first time doing a campaign on it.
It was very interesting world, for sure. And like with so many creators, so influencers, and we'll dig into that in a second. Do these people can make a living out of just creating content? What's the story there?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's tough because absolutely, some people make great livings doing it. There's no doubt about that. It is a vanishingly small percentage of the people who are doing it, are making a phenomenal, like the livings you see that, them showing off on Instagram or YouTube. Right now, the very top, 0.01% of content creators absorb the vast majority of spend in the space. And it's a bit of a challenge because there are a lot of creators, like I said, producing really good content. And so getting them in touch with people who might want to sponsor them is actually something that I think is going to have to change quite a lot over the next 5 or 10 years. I think we're going to see that a broader base of creators be able to monetize their accounts and really be able to make good use of it. But right now it's a very small group. The vast majority do it because they love it. They joined one of these platforms that started making content because they enjoy that. And I think if this is a career you want to pursue, then you probably should very much enjoy it first. And if it turns out to be good for money, then great. But it's a little bit like getting into a professional sports league. Like, not very many make it.
Okay, no, that's a good analogy actually. And so obviously words of wisdom that we're sharing here with students as well, who may be thinking themselves can actually move into this space. What is the risk for a brand when using an influencer, do you think?
Great question. The risk is very different. So, if you're using traditional ads, the advantage of that is that you control everything about the message, more or less. You are designing the ad, you are creating the ad copy, the video, whatever the content is. Whereas with creators, you're very much, the advantage that they bring of having this organic word of mouth, genuine reaction is that it may be their genuine reaction, which isn't always positive. So I think a lot of brands struggle with what we refer to as targeting, as finding the right creators for whatever it is they're trying to accomplish. Like I said before, because so much attention is drawn to that very, very top niche or that very top tier of creators, I think a lot of brands gravitate to them first, even if they aren't necessarily the best fit. So the risk they take is that this creator does it and doesn't like whatever the product is or the game or the service, or they more commonly they do it and it's like a 9 to 5 job. They say, okay, I will say, give you 2 posts and I will say these words in it, and they do it, and that's it. They're not actually interested in the product. They're not really engaging with the brand organically. They're not following up with people who respond or reply in the comments. So that can be a big challenge. Is there's a lot of people who have become big creators because they're interesting personalities, or they're funny, or they do something unusual, and then a brand that doesn't fit that at all attempts to try to use them, and it's not a good fit. And so money gets exchanged, but nobody really felt like they won in the deal. So I think that's a big risk. Is it takes an enormous amount of effort for a brand to really find creators that may fit what they're trying to do.
No, that's very interesting for sure, because it's obviously there's a thought process when it comes to even that selection of an influencer, right? Um, how's the pricing for influencer marketing determined, you think?
It depends a lot on the platform. So each platform has its own kind of KPIs for what what counts as success, I guess. For traditionally, for example, an easy one to compare is traditionally YouTube, which is measured in views and view count. And if you go on YouTube, you can see the view count for the video right there. But something like Twitch, which is much more based around live streaming, is view count is not as reliable. And I actually think that as of April, Twitch no longer reports view count on a lot of their videos because it was such an unreliable metric for them. So instead, they measure by other metrics. So I think even before you get into kind of cost, you have to figure out, okay, like what are we exactly paying for? What does a view on YouTube mean? What is an impression on a Facebook ad versus, an Instagram video? So I think a lot of brands who are new to that space have to figure that out. And then the cost is really, determined by the market. That really, every creator will try to figure out for themselves what makes sense in their space. The top tier can price much more aggressively than everybody else. And some people specialize, like they find a very particular niche of things that they do, and they're able to monetize that really well. Right now, it's very opaque. It can be quite hard to know if you've gotten a good deal. And even if there is an average price, as I said before, like the performance for that cost is highly variable. And so you may get a big organic viral explosion from that, or you may get crickets. So it's assessing like true value is very difficult for a lot of brands right now.
Okay. Interesting space to obviously keep an eye on. For a few last questions. What are the top platforms for influencing? Is it just social media? You mentioned a few things here and there, but how can it happen besides that?
Yeah, the top platforms, it depends what space you're in, but I think for most traditional brands, it's been Instagram was I think the one that a lot of them would turn to first. I think for video, YouTube was always, or has been in the last 10 years, kind of the biggest one. Now that's being, I don't know if replaced, but at least supplemented by Twitch, which does a very different kind of video. YouTube, it's much more, you make a good piece of edited content and people will watch it hopefully forever. Twitch is much more, because it's live streaming, it's much more around an event. It's much more like people come into the room to see a thing happening, or to see a particular person doing something at a certain time. TikTok increasingly is kind of filling the space that Vine left with, like, short form video. And so there's a lot of kind of creators working on that. I think these platforms, keeping track of kind of what is going to be big and what isn't is difficult. I think everybody who builds one of these social media platforms hopes it becomes a big thing and they can monetize it this way. It's hard to predict, like I mentioned Vine, like if you are, under the age of 25, Vine might mean nothing to you. Where it was, if you see TikTok now and you remember Vine, it's like, oh yeah, like we've seen this before. We've been here before. It's challenging with platforms. You never really know which ones are going to stick, even if they have a pretty big user base and they seem to be popular. that doesn't necessarily guarantee that they can monetize it well and be successful in the long run.
Yeah, and speaking of Vine, for those obviously watching this video, it was kind of like TikTok, but we're talking about not what is that, 8 years ago, something like that. They were acquired by Twitter,
So
if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, I mean, ancient in internet years. Yeah.
Right. And I don't know, I mean, Twitter, when they pay whatever million for this company, it was an opportunity, and it seems like they killed it. So
Yeah, Vine always struggled with the monetizing, like inserting ads. The challenge with video is you want to insert ads, but the more you insert ads, the more annoyed people get, which is a lesson Netflix is currently learning. There's always that difficulty with ads, whereas with static images, you can always have the image here and an ad off to the side or something like that. And a lot of platforms struggle to monetize the creator part of it. So even though you can pay Instagram to do ads, it's harder to pay Instagram in order to get someone who's popular on Instagram. Usually you go to the user and not Instagram themselves. So platforms are always trying to figure out how do they get a piece of that creator money, and that can be challenging to monetize. So Vine had a lot of, I would call mind share. A lot of people knew about Vine. A lot of people watched Vine videos, but actually turning that into money for them was very difficult.
Interesting. All right. Well, we'll take one last question, which is
Sure.
of track actually, and this is taking advantage of you working in the game industry, and so not so much about influencing marketing, but about the gaming industry. This is just to provide some extra knowledge to those watching this video about the size of this industry, because sometimes it's, unless you are working on it, you know the numbers, but for most people that are outside this industry, they just have no idea how big it is. And so just in 20 seconds, do you want to tell us how big it is by maybe using an analogy, a comparison, something that can explain how massive this is?
Oh gosh, it's I don't know the numbers myself, but it is absolutely enormous, and I actually would be curious to compare it to, for example, like the movie industry or something like that, because what's unusual about the gaming industry is, well, there are a couple of things, but unlike movies, which traditionally, until streaming kind of relied on theaters as their main form of being consumed, gaming has always been on many different platforms. And so gaming, everybody knows the major consoles. There's PC, there's Xbox, there's PlayStation, there's Nintendo consoles. And increasingly mobile games are a huge part of this as well. So gaming, I would have no idea off the top of my head how big of a number it is, but I think what makes it very interesting is that unlike something like movies, where by having one channel and especially by having theaters, it left a very small number of big players. If you and I wanted to make a movie and get into theaters, it would be incredibly difficult. It would be just an impossible job. Whereas there are games that have been made by two people that have gone on to be financially successful. There's a much longer tail of activity in gaming than you would see in something like movies. So I think what that means is that gaming has a lot of potential for growth every time a new platform becomes available. The iPad comes available, and whatever game will be like, oh, let's release an iPad version now. Like that's a place we can monetize. So it gives it a lot of flexibility to be able to grow wherever the audience is. I don't know the number off the top of my head. Probably should.
I'll share some just numbers that I know
please.
That are just amazing. But for instance, obviously you use the comparison with movies, and so the highest gross profit movie I think is Avatar, that made some $3 billion or something like that. So in history, in the history of movies, right? And to compare just that to one game, only one game. Only 1 day of sales. Only one game, only 1 day of sales. Not the whole history of the game. Not any other day of the year or over time. Grand Theft Auto 5, I think it was on the first day, it sold $600 million or something like that.
Yeah.
Again, 3 billion, and imagine how many billions obviously Grand Theft Auto would have made there. So just to again compare. And that's obviously a big game. But let's talk about, because you mentioned it about, being only two people and launching a game and being quite successful. I think it was a Fruit Ninja one. Actually, that's an Australian example.
Mhm.
It's a mobile game of just,
Yep.
suddenly just lashing fruit, right? 99 cents a piece. But what happens when you had 300 million downloads? Just do the math, right?
Yeah.
So that I'll leave it there because I just wanted to bring that little bit of information there to this forum because it opens your eyes, right, about how big this is. But anyway, I wanted to say thank you for your time, Jason. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge about the influencer marketing part. And you have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This was great.